Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we have a team report from Vancouver Regionals, and I am joined by the Vancouver Regional Champion, Gavin Michaels. How are you doing?
Doing good, Audie. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. And I guess, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been playing VGC since 2011, which I realized literally half my life at this point, or close to it. I guess depends how you count. I might not be good at counting. But we're getting up there. Yeah, I won two regionals before this in 17, and I won a nationals before this in 2013. So this is like the last relevant thing I've done in 5 years.
But I mean, three-time regional champion. You're finally out of
Mhm.
the two-time club, leaving behind Justin Burns and Alex Underhill, are good
Mhm.
friends. So you can lord that over them.
Mhm.
Yeah, a really, really impressive win, a really dominant performance over the course of that entire weekend. And you used Lunadon.
I
And
did.
so, do you want to? And you are, of course, known for using Lunadon. You used it throughout 2019. So, I guess it's a dumb question, but why did you choose to run Lunadon?
So I was really struggling in the beginning of this format, finding anything that actually felt like it made sense to me. It felt like to me, every team in this format really valued precision and offensive maneuverability. And I think I told you in the beginning of this format, I was like, Adi, there's no shot that I can ever do well in this format because it's all just hyper offense stuff. And it's like so many of the teams that have done well this format are the type of teams where it's like you lead two Pokemon, you have them both knocked out, and then you win with your back two Pokemon. And I can't really play like that. That doesn't lend itself to my strengths. So for Lunadon, this is a team based off of Berne Maya, I believe is how I pronounce it, showed during NPA and said, oh, okay, wait, this is actually kind of cool. It actually does allow you to play Turtley more conservatively and just kind of play more to my strengths, which I think is long-term game plans and maneuvering that way, as opposed to just how do I make sure I win in the next three turns? How do I make sure I pick up all the not Pokemon? It's like I don't think I'm very good at the micro decision making, but this team you're more so trying to do macro decision making, and then you go in with a game plan and you kind of are able to execute.
Mm-hmm. And so, I guess, talk me through your team building process and why you chose these six Pokemon.
So I started with these six Pokemon because those were the six Pokemon on Burnamaya's pace, and I saw no reason to change. So I can go into an idea of what the strengths of this really are. So
Mhm.
with Groudon, right, the main strength of Groudon, in my opinion, and the reason you'd want to use it is because you get to run the two G Maxes with it. You get the Charizard and the Venusaur, and that's on your team for free. It's like obviously there's a lot of teams that do very well with just one of the two, right? But it's kind of like if you're able to run two of them, that's kind of like the ideal state of a Groudon team, right?
Mhm.
Um, and especially with the Grimmsnarl providing the screen support, I think allows you to play more bulky, have more room to maneuver, and then it's like when games take longer, the damage over time from the G Maxes is all the more important. So I think partnering the screens with that G Max is a very natural fit. The reason for Lunala is also to just provide a lot more bulk than something like a Zacian would. I think that Zacian is strongest when you're able to kind of have it sit in the back and then come in and just kind of clean it up. Um, which means that the rest of the Pokemon are going to be kind of doing the heavy lifting and the positioning and all that. And that kind of makes it harder to, in my opinion, to get a Charizard in a good spot to kind of clean up. Whereas
Mhm.
Lunala is more so the one that's kind of doing the maneuvering for you. Lunala can take hits. This Lunala, I believe, with Reflect Up, can take two Throat Chops from Incineroar. Which
Wow.
is, yeah. So you're just super bulky. You're able to get up to the Trick Room and then turn games around that way. You're able to just kind of sit in front of an opposing Charizard and threaten the Meteor Beam or the Trick Room, either one, and
Mhm.
it plays for you. And then Incineroar is on the team because it's Incineroar.
Yeah. That's really interesting that you think of Lunala as like a Pokemon that allows you to play that sort of game. I almost think
Mhm.
that I always thought of it as Zacian being the Pokemon that was more able to do that because it has a lot better resistances. And Lunala, it feels like, wants to sit on the field. If it switches in and Shadow Shield is broken, it's a lot less bulky. And then Meteor Beam also really lends itself to a Pokemon sitting on the field for a few turns in a row. And so it's really interesting that you thought of it as a Pokemon that has the ability to pivot. And I guess the Moonlight on it probably helps with that a little bit.
Yeah, the Moonlight on it is pretty fun in my opinion, just because it does make Lunala basically impossible to get rid of. And with Lunala, you're always kind of stuck in this catch-22 of if you ignore it, right, and say like, okay, I'm going to focus on the other mons, then Lunala is going to be at +1 at full health, and then guess what? I'm going to max the Lunala. And then if you like focus down the Lunala, right, then okay, I still get the Trick Room up, and then I get to max either the Groudon, the Venusaur, or the Charizard. And it's like, I have game plans with this team where I bring Lunala, Groudon, Charizard, and Venusaur, and it's like I'm saying I could potentially max any one of them this game, and it's kind of like because of that absurd level of flexibility, your opponent can't like prepare properly. Whereas like your opponent knows there's a Zacian in back, like they're playing their whole game around that. They're gonna get one Airstream them up with Charizard. They can do that, but it's like, how do you game plan around 4 maxes?
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so talk me through the individual Pokemon, their movesets, their EV spreads. I know I was in the room for some of these EV spreads. Choppa was on an elevator for some of these EV spreads. But talk me through why the Pokemon are trained the way they are.
Sure. Okay. So I'll start with the Lunala just because it is relatively interesting. So as I said earlier, it can take 2 Incineroar Throat Chops with Reflect Up, which is a lot. Lunala is so bulky, it can do things that don't make any sense. For example, did you know that with Reflect Up, Lunala can survive a Behemoth Blade, then a Max Darkness from Thundurus all the time?
Wow. That's
like,
crazy.
No, it's so much bulkier than you would ever possibly think that it is, especially with screen support, that you can do it, and it's just like, it doesn't die to anything. Sorry, it doesn't faint. I got in trouble in the Vancouver stream for that. Yeah. And then on this one, I'm trying to remember the reason that we had a 21 speed IV. I'm sure there was a good reason for it. I think it was to make it so that it was as slow as possible while still outrunning a -2 Shadow Rider. With the idea there being that you can set up a lot of win cons, both having Grimmsnarl and Lunala, and then you can like scary face the Shadow Rider, have it take any chip from a Gmax, and then Lunala can beat it. Yeah. So the reason I opted for Moonlight over Protect is really just that Lunala can sit on the field for a lot longer, that the opponent has to continuously throw attacks into it. Now, there are other ways of dealing with Lunala, namely Eerie Impulse. Like, if you can get the special attack drops on Lunala, that kind of does even beat the Moonlight set. But the Moonlight set does stop a multitude of ways of that people can deal with it, which I think is very cool. Especially because, like, people kind of want to switch. They don't want to just, like, eat dirt from, like, a +1 Moongeist Beam. So, yeah.
Right.
All right, moving on to the Incineroar. The Incin was mainly brought into Rinia and other Zacian Groudon comps. So as you can see, it's way more physically offensive with the Citrus Berry. What that lets it do, I believe, is take 2 -1 P-Blades. So it's like, it just doesn't do any damage. And 2 Sacred Swords after you get an Intimidate off on the Zacian. So everything comes with 3 KO. And then as for the moveset, it's as boring as humanly possible. I will say, like, Throat Chop comes up way more often than you'd think, especially with, like, the decent amount of speed EVs I have on it. Like, I was able to win a lot of games just because, like, people are so reliant on being able to parting shot in order to get their fake out later, especially for the bulk up Groudon, which we'll talk about next. So, Bulk Up Dawn is obviously not the most common Groudon set, but it's my favorite because, oh my god, literally, it's such a win con mod. Like, against Rinia stuff, or against pretty much any, like, Sun team, if you KO the Charizard, Groudon wins 1v3. At Nationals, I almost had a Groudon 1v4. Like, you can't put in perspective enough just like how annoying it is to deal with. You just keep clicking bulk up, and then like half the format can't touch it, and then it's still doing good damage with P blades and rock slide, and then maybe it's even able to max, and you're feeding a max quake boost to the Lunala, which also can't be removed from the field because of Moonlight. Now it's just even harder to take out. And it's just like you're just like stacking stats. My
Right.
personal belief is that um, moves that can increase your defense or recovery, right? Like both of those aspects become stronger with screens, and it's like it has like a multiplicative effect. Since +1 defense, right? Then like attacks, you get 50% reduction, right? Same thing with screens, but if you combine them together, then you're getting that 2.25x reduction. So it's just like
Right.
attacks are just doing less and less damage, and then the recovery becomes even more important because it's like, well, if the Zacian Behemoth Blade is all of a sudden only doing like 25% or something, then it's like crowd on sealing a quarter of the Behemoth Blade every turn. That's crazy, especially because let's be real, these games are going to go a while. It's going to sit on the turn for a long, field for a long time.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I think a lot of Zacian teams, at least, they're using Zacian as their primary cleanup mon, and even against
Mm-hmm.
Groudon, they're expecting the Behemoth Blade to do 60%, maybe stall out screens and then do 60. And so
Yeah,
when you do get those bulk ups off, it is so hard for those teams to end game. And I think, yeah, like you said, a lot of times it is just get rid of the Charizard, and then nothing else on the team can actually KO the Groudon.
yeah. I know this is a little out of order, but like I think what this team does very strong is it forces Zacian in order to be effective to be led. And then I'm saying, haha, you have to lead Zacian into Charizard, Groudon, and Cineroar. And it's like that's like the first thing that you learn like playing this format since like February is that you don't lead Zacian into that because it's way too scare bears. And then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just kind of like, well, if you invalidate the Zacian, then you're able to get in really advantageous slots. And in the Vancouver run, I had a lot of people just refuse to bring the Zacian into me.
Right.
Yeah,
And that was, I think, one of the things that we were talking about when Rinya Sun became really popular was that team does such a good job of invalidating Zacian as a Pokemon.
yeah,
And we wanted to build teams that do that. Um, and obviously, this team does it really well. And also, I think that's part of why we've seen a rise of teams that don't have Zacian on them, is because we're seeing teams like this one that are just built to make it so you cannot bring Zacian into them and you have to only play with one restricted.
yeah, exactly. Especially when you're opting into the Sun comps, right? It does feel like having a Zacian is a straight up disadvantage in the mirror because it's like, well, you want something that's actually able to fight against the Charizard, and like it feels so bad to like just have a team that's just like right from the get go, like it's gonna have bad matchups. Like obviously, Zacian Groudon can do a lot of crazy stuff, but it feels like a pretty uphill battle a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And so, I guess, talk me through this Venusaur, because it is a bold nature. It's got a lot of bulk investment.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
So this is the rain matchup. This Venusaur is funny. It lives Behemoth Blade, just like the +1 Zacian, no Reflect Up. It just lives. It's like 6.3% chance to KO with like Jolly. Who cares? Like you just don't die. And then yeah. My logic behind Venusaur is that the max Vine Lash is your damage output, right? And the reason that you're bringing the Venusaur is to be able to get Vines up and occasionally Sleep Powder. It's like why not? It's there.
Mhm.
And it's like everything else is just kind of. I actually used to have Protect over Sludge Bomb on this too, just to like really play around that idea, but I had some issues. So by using this hyper fat Venusaur, it makes it so that you just can't get rid of it, and the opponent always has to deal with going into vines, which is pretty annoying. And also combos with the Koba Berry, which basically means that Venusaur I mainly brought against rain teams, which pretty much all of them have an Airstreamer. And so you can kind of just say, like, I don't care. You're not going to do that much damage. And I'm just going to get a lot of damage off, anyways. I know some people run like weakness policy to be like, aha, you activated my trap card. I'm going to do even more damage now. But it's like, my philosophy is just like, you're going to do more damage by just like Vine Lash, Max Card Vine Lash or something. So, I don't know. This, fun fact, this actually used to be Assault Vest Venusaur. Uh,
Yep, I
the,
remember that.
the only reason that changed was because rain teams with Landorus Tier are becoming more common. And I don't know, that it felt pretty bad into that. So Kobo it is. Yeah. reason I ended up going for the Earth Power and Sludge Bomb, like Venusaur has a lot of filler moves that you might want to run on, like Weather Ball, Protect, etc., etc. For me, Earth Power was just kind of like a necessity for fighting the Incineroar team. Incineroars, just because like obviously if you're using Lunala Groudon, like people are gonna bring Incineroar to you every game, especially with no Thundurus. So just having like just one more way of just be able to consistently hit it, always nice. As for Sludge Bomb, what I found was that against most Kyogre teams, just max and relax with the Venusaur worked. However, against the kind of Crystal Rain that like Grimmsnarl, Zapdos, Rain, however you want to call it, it wasn't so effective because of the existence of the Rillaboom and of the Roost Zapdos. Normally, when you Vine Lash, you expect that residual damage to add up and allow you to be able to clean up with the Groudon later. It turns out that if they have a Rillaboom, grass types are immune to Vine Lash, which, yeah. I know, it's unfair that G-Maxes have counterplay.
Yeah, they're not strong enough. They got to buff them a little bit.
I'm saying, yeah. Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. Anyways, Charizard is doing Charizard things. Charizard is easily the most explosive Pokemon in the format, which I probably could have turned into a pun, but we're going to choose not to. Basically, like, Charizard is a constant threat in Team Preview, and everyone is going to make sure that no matter what, that they are not getting owned by Charizard on turn 1. And, like, that's their number one priority. Like, when people flowchart their matchups against Rinja Sun, for example, they're thinking about, how do I not lose to Charizard Groudon lead straight up? Or it's like, how do I have some kind of degenerate setup that always beats Charizard Grimmsnarl? It's really hard to. Yeah. So Charizard is a mon that you always want to have the threat of having or being able to win with it in back. I found that the most effective use of Charizard was against teams like either Yveltal Zacian, where you like are able to just have Charizard sit up and back and clean up late game, or against a lot of those Shadow Rider Thundurus teams, just because like Charizard can sometimes have some degenerate lines, and it's like my game plan against Thundurus Shadow Rider was legitimately like involved like scary facing the Thundurus to make sure that Charizard could get off a Wildfire and everything, and it's like Charizard lets you do that just because like it is such an unstoppable force. And like I know that like it's like some people drop it on comps like this just because like, well, it's not very consistent, but like I think that it just allows you to win so many more games that are just otherwise like untenable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As also why like yeah, sorry, go for it.
And so I noticed that you're not running Blast Burn like a lot of people do, and you're also running a little more bulk than most people do on their Zards. Can you explain?
Oh shoot, I gave you the wrong. I must have given you the wrong paste. Sorry.
No worries. Did you have the right paste on hand?
I do. Yeah. Wow. I totally had the wrong paste. That's really funny.
That's fine.
Yeah, let me send this to you on Discord chat for gamers. The Lunala and the Groudon are fast enough on this version to outrun Thundurus at -1 speed. Because that way you can scary face it, and even if they airstream, you can revenge kill it with a Meteor Beam. Also, it's important for Lunala to be slower than Groudon, just so that way you can go for the Trick Room, and then like Max Phantasm into Blades is a really strong combination.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So back to Charizard, I guess.
Oops. Yeah. So the Blast Burn was actually pretty necessary because with Life Orb, Max Wildfire always KOs Shadow Rider with the hit plus Wildfire damage, and it also always KOs your Gothitelle with that. So like those were two pretty important things heading into Vancouver.
Wow, can't believe I got counter teams. No, it's fine. I won the mirror, so it's not the mirror. I won the matchup when I got to play it. So
that's true. Really interesting. Yeah. It also was like Charizard was able to carry just enough in the Thunder Shadow Rider matchup to make it so that the Grimmsnarl gets to be Light Clay. You'll notice on pretty much every other version of these Lunadon teams that the Grimmsnarl is not Light Clay because for some matchups it's just like you can't win without like being able to like trick an Iron Ball onto Thundurus is like the idea, or trick a Lagging Tail. For me, I was able to kind of get around that by just like flowcharting those game plans really well, and then saying no, like light clay just does too much in really important like grind fest matchups, like especially against like Crystal Rain.
Yeah, that definitely seems like when you have a team with stuff like Moonlight, Lunala, Bulk Up, Groudon, where you do need a few turns to set up, you're not winning on by turn 8 or by turn
No.
5 when light screen expires, right? And so you do need does seem like you need those extra turns.
Yeah, you do. Otherwise, like it's so easy to just stall it out, and then all of this like end game bulky stuff just does not work. Like you
Mm-hmm.
need that extra turns. I ended up like I mean I was testing like Iron Ball and everything, but it's just like outside of the matchups where it's just like kind of auto wins, it's just like it feels worse.
And then do you know offhand what the Grimmsnarl Levy spread does?
I believe that it's fast enough to outrun a -1 or sorry, a -2 Charizard, and it also pretty much always lives a fake out plus life orb airstream from Thunderous. So fake out from instant life
Gotcha.
orb airstream from Thunderous.
Yeah. Like I alluded to earlier, a lot of these EV spreads were decided the night before Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
um, when two of us, Choppa and Elisa, were sitting in the hotel lobby, and just like chatting, waiting for people to show up. And Choppa was going up at one point. Choppa was going up an elevator to the bathroom, and he was just
Escalator,
like
escalator,
yell,
escalator.
sorry, escalator to the bathroom and yelling out EV spreads for the entire lobby to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like those came in clutch because you did end up, of course, winning the entire event.
Yeah, no,
So
it's like normally I'm not too big on like changing like spreads the night before, but there are reasonable enough changes.
and so on that note, uh, were there any changes that you would make to this team going into future tournaments? I know you brought a very similar
Mhm.
team to U.S. Nationals.
Yeah, for nationals, basically the changes were stuff that Elisa Misalami like recommended, and we ended up testing it, and it turned out to be very, very potent. So the main one is that Incineroar became an Umbreon, which the main reason for that is that Umbreon can auto win some matchups that are kind of like designed with the idea of like, oh, obviously I always beat Lunadon. What Umbreon does is it basically you have taunt to shut down the P2s. You can yawn out the evil talls. You can just like stay there forever. Like there are some matchups that with Umbreon are legitimate auto win. Like I'd say the vast majority of Evil Dawns and Shadow Rider Dawns, basically like basically any team that doesn't have a gosh a Palkia, a Kyogre, or a Zacian. So all two of those teams is an auto win with an Umbreon. Um, so yeah,
Mhm.
and it felt like most of the times we were bringing Incineroar, it was kind of for those teams anyways. So it's like screw it, might as well just have them on that kind of hard carry there.
Right. Yeah, I know after Nationals, Choppa wished that he had run Incineroar, but it sounded like you and Elisa definitely preferred Umbreon on this team. So I guess you could go
Yeah,
either way.
yeah, it's a stylistic choice, I'd say. I think that Incineroar is a mon that like sometimes it feels like for a lot of matchups like you wish that like oh maybe I can bring it sometimes. It's like it felt like Incineroar was kind of just like a half-assed mix-up option a lot of the time. So I
Mhm.
definitely prefer Umbreon, but it's like I if you want that additional flexibility in team preview, I can definitely understand Incineroar.
Right. And then the other change it looks like you made is you dropped Moonlight on Lunala for Hypnosis. And I've
Yeah,
seen some angry tweets about that. So do you want to tell us about that change?
yeah. So as I alluded to earlier a little bit, the what Moonlight did is it made it so that the only way you could really like neutralize Lunala was that Eerie Impulse. However, a lot of teams were starting to run that Eerie Impulse. Um, and it made it hard just because it's like, well, with the Lunala threatened out, then it's like not too difficult for them to punish a switch or something. What Hypnosis Lunala does is it says, no, just because I can't do any damage doesn't mean I have to switch. You just get to click Hypnosis into those really passive teams. And it's just like, well, it works. Like, I felt like the matchup against Crystal Rain was just a little bit too close, and Hypnosis definitely made it more favorable.
Sure. And if nothing else, it is certainly infuriating to play against. It is
Mhm.
terrifying to play against, and might even be enough to like convince players to bring a suboptimal choice like a Tapu Fini that you might not otherwise bring into this team.
Yeah, I think that like Tapu Fini is kind of a must bring into this team just because it's got 3 sleep moves and also 10 moves that can miss, I think, if I'm getting that right. Yeah.
I'm not going to do the math, but I believe it.
All right, it's 9. Sorry, I lied to you, America. Um, yeah. It's but still it's like you kind of force the Tapu Fini, which otherwise isn't doing a whole lot here, and like, yeah, it's something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess going back to the original version of the team or the new one, talk me through the game plans that you had for some of the matchups that you expected to face.
Yeah, sure. So hang on, let me look at my notes here. So against Rinya's Sun, I ended up kind of going with a approach of Grim Lunala, Charizard, Groudon with the Nationals version, and sometimes Incineroar over Charizard on the Vancouver version. The logic of how I approached the Rinya's Sun matchup was that if you're able to knock out the Charizard, Groudon is able to win. So it's kind of like it's a bit of a cat and mouse game where your goal is to just make sure that like the Charizard isn't able to do anything. So if they commit their, you kind of want to like bait them into maxing too early, as you're able to get up a Trick Room, and then if they do that, then game's just over. You literally like give up Grimmsnarl, only get one screen up, but it's like, you have Trick Room up, you have Rock Slide Meteor Beam, like staring down, it's over, it's done. So, um, and then if they are able to switch out and preserve it, what you need to be able to do is just get enough mileage out of a Groudon in Trick Room to basically force that Charizard in. One key thing I find in this matchup reoccurring again is that oftentimes Charizards will try to switch in on a P-Blades. So that's why you kind of need to randomly Rock Slide, even though it looks silly, just because the Charizard is going to try to come in. Yeah, I'd say that's like the key to that matchup.
Right.
One thing I want to touch upon for the Zacian Kyogre matchup that I think is kind of funny is a lot of the matchup does come down to whoever is faster between your Groudon and their Kyogre, which sucks because it's always different. Literally, you never know. Like, and also for some reason, it feels like they always know. It's annoying. Very often, what you're trying to kind of go for in those situations is you're trying to use your Venusaur to beat the Kyogre, so you often lead it, and then it's like if there's no Kyogre, you switch it out in order for the Venusaur to be able to beat it later, and then commit to it when you do see the Kyogre. One very common thing you'll do is try to go for a Trick Room sweep with Venusaur, actually. So even though you are bringing the Groudon, in Trick Room, your Venusaur is probably going to be slower than their Kyogre. And so you can kind of leverage that to just be like, sorry, just fat grass, getting off those Vine Lashes. And it feels more consistent than relying on like trying to outrun it with Chlorophyll when they can just turn off the rain immediately anyways.
Right.
Yeah. And then, oh God. So the Shadow Rider Zacian matchup with this team is degenerate as hell. So basically, every Shadow Rider Thundurus player ever, the first time they see this team, will lead Shadow Rider and Thundurus next to each other. No ifs, ands, or buts. They always do it. And what you can do basically is like reflect Max Scar and then try to like, depending on what they do, you're gonna like scary face something to get up like a wildfire off. And it's like this complicated flowchart, which is basically saying that like with enough chip, Lunala's Meteor Beam is able to KO the Thundurus, and then if you're able to, and then also if you're ever able to KO the Shadow Rider, then the Groudon just wins, which is a kind of common motif with this team, I'd say, is like recognizing the threat and like it's just remembering which mons you've brought to deal with that threat specifically, and just being able to like rotate it out to deal with the appropriate Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense.
Right. Yeah, definitely, especially with Pokemon like Bulk Up Groudon, where usually they only have one thing to kill it. Identifying the threat, getting rid of it, prioritizing your Pokemon that can KO it. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah, and I mean that's the kind of trick to the whole team. Really, is just keep the right Pokemon alive, recognize which end games are wins for you and which ones are losses, and then play to the kind of like one end games, especially because your opponent isn't always going to be able to recognize that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then you said that this is what they always do game one. If they're a Thunderous Shadow Rider, did you have game plans for game 2 and 3?
They always adjust something differently. Like I played like 3 Thunderous Shadow Riders that adjusted differently. And it's just like, you never know. You kind of just got to play Pokemon at that point. But it's like you get the win for that match at least. I don't know. It's the type of thing where it's like Charizard is an inherently volatile Pokemon, right? And it's kind of like in a matchup where you're probably objectively not favored, you're trying to introduce volatility. And so it's like you kind of can't complain when it's just like it comes down to just like, all right, having to call stuff out.
Right. And then so a couple other matchups that I think are pretty relevant. I guess the Life Orb Kyogre variants that have really grown in popularity recently. Or even like the Mystic Water variants, like what Agati and Ink used at the North American Championships.
Oh my god!
I think both of those are pretty relevant. I guess Palkia Cali Ice is also relevant, and then the Mirror is now more common than ever.
Yeah. For those Kyogre teams, the game plan against degenerate Kyogre teams was the matchup's bad, so you force volatility, and the best way to force volatility is to lead Charizard Venusaur with Lunala Groudon and back. And then, like, no matter what they lead, it is impossible to cover every option. And so you're threatening to Sleep Powder, but you're also threatening to max the Venusaur, but also the Charizard, and also just double switch, and also just protect switch, and just you kind of just go like, okay, you can't deal with everything. Also against those very aggressive Kyogre teams, often getting a Trick Room up is basically just a win. Unless they also have a Moongus, in which case it's not a win. So you can't do that. And you kind of just use Lunala as a Hypnosis bot. But that's okay, because Hypnosis hits more often than it doesn't.
If you miss, really, you got hexed out.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
It's all about the complaint equity.
Listen, in every bad format that's ever existed, Hypnosis has always found its way to rise to the top.
Except for the one to the Dark Void.
No, Hypnosis also rose to the top in those too.
Right. You run Hypnosis Bronzong. Yeah. That's Pokemon. Why do we play this game? Yeah. So okay. So if they lead like, I don't know, Tornado Sasha, that felt like the most common lead that Agati was leading. Do you have one thing that you do, or do you just like look your opponent in the eyes?
You need to be able to do multiple things, because they can either double the Charizard, or they can like throw attacks into the Venusaur. Oftentimes what I kind of use game 1 into that is them not realizing that Behemoth Blade didn't Oko Venusaur. So like Sleep Powdering the Zacian going into Groudon is safe, because it's like, well, you force a Tailwind out, and like that's an option. However, oftentimes I found that it was kind of better to just kind of get a little greedy. But yeah, that's like the safe option there. But then it's like you're trying to force them to respect the Charizard max. So very often, like I would go for like a Protect Sleep Powder and say like, well, if you double up and KO the Venusaur, congrats. I'm gonna have to go for another degenerate play later, but it's fine. We can work it out. So if that makes any sense, but it's like you got to be able to call it.
Right. And then I guess how do you feel about the Palkia Cali Ice matchup?
That's not very good. So it really depends on the variant. I'd say all of the variants with like the P2s are significantly harder. Without the P2, you don't really care. Like you throw a Lunala at it, it's fine. But with the P2, you kind of aren't able to do that. So oftentimes what I'd be trying to do is try to lead the Charizard with some way to like deal with the Palkia, right? But then if they have the Feeny, and it's like that Feeny P2 variant, then you kind of can't really do that. I'd say that with the Vancouver team, you don't really have outs into that. With the Nationals version of the team, you do, just because of like the Taunt Umbreon being able to shut down the Pokemon enough. It's funny, actually. This is a matchup where going into the tournament, I thought we had more prepared. But then in round 2, I sit down and my opponent leads Palkia Feeny, and I'm like, oh, we never tested this, huh? And I led Double Dark. So it didn't go amazing. But yeah.
Right.
Um, it's the type of thing where like you don't have anything that can consistently beat all of their leads generally. If it's that like
Mhm.
hyper standard team like what Justin Burns was using. So you need to be able to like change things up. All Pokemon are bringable here. I'd say that more often, pretty much all the time though, you're gonna want to lead the Grimmsnarl just because it's so hard to deal with the Palkia if you don't lead the Grimmsnarl.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I know that on our team, that of course Justin used and got top 4 at nationals with, we changed from Gothitelle to Porygon 2 specifically because Lunadon won Vancouver. It got 2 slots in top 8 at Milwaukee
Mhm.
regionals. Then of course did really really well at the North American Championships as well. So Porygon 2
Yeah,
is really important for that matchup that we expected to see a lot of and did actually do very well.
yeah, exactly. And then for the mirror, there's a lot of philosophies for how to play the mirror. I'd say that the most common approach that people go for is leading Charizard Lunala into you, which I
Mhm.
actually don't like. I'm kind of a proponent of I think that you want to drop Lunala for this matchup and bring Double Dark. Mainly just because like yeah, Lunala is useful for being able to get a Meteor Beam off onto the Charizard, but you're probably gonna be maxing your Charizard more often than not in the mirror. So then it's like you only got that one shot with a Meteor Beam. And then also it takes chip from the wildfire damage. It's like, I don't know. I don't really love that approach. So it's like
Mhm.
obviously it's a mirror, like you kind of gotta be able to outplay. But yeah, I'd say that like um I generally like the double dark lead the most in the mirror with Zardon back. For whichever
Yeah.
version.
Sure. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess that covers most of the notable matchups in this metagame right now. Were there any other matchups that you were really scared of or that you had prepared a lot for?
Yeah, I prepared for the colossal version a lot just because the specific colossal team that's going around nowadays has a lot of techs that are kind of scary for it. Namely, they have taunt, safety goggles, evil tall, and like fast taunt incineroar. So it's like you kind of need to be able to like bait out taunts and then pressure out with the Groudon, and then also manage to like preserve the HP of like either the Umbreon or the Groudon, so that the Venusaur can win later to shut down the Colossal. And it's like your Grimmsnarl will click Spirit Break 20 times that per game, even though it's taunted, but it's fine. You pretend that it's fine, and then yeah, it's a hard matchup, but it's one that like I went through a good amount, and it's like it does feel like if you know everything that you're doing, that it should be Lunadon favored. Funny enough, but it's really hard.
I I mean, I know in Top Cut Milwaukee, we saw, Calvin went 8-0 in Swiss, who had this really dominant run, and then ran into Evil Dawn in top 8 round 1,
Mhm.
with Zhe using it, and it looked like it was impossible for him. So
Yeah,
maybe with the night of prep for the Evil Top player, it becomes a lot more difficult because they actually know what they have to prioritize. But
yeah, it's it's tricky. Like you need to be able to get the screens up, and you need to be able to like win with either Charizard or Venusaur, depending on like what they got in the matchup. If you have Umbreon, then you just go free. Like
mhm,
I was I was hoping that people would still just team. And
yeah.
then yeah.
Mhm. But yeah, so those are some of the common matchups. Do you want to talk me through a couple notable matches from your Vancouver Regionals win over the course of the tournament?
Yeah, I'd say there's two I want to highlight on. The first is against Jean Marc, just because like Jean Marc was using Crystal Rain, and I played him both in Swiss and in Top Cut. So objectively, those games are terribly boring to watch. There are 15 turns of just switching around and everything, and oh my god, that sucks. I think the main takeaways from it are just realizing that my Groudon was actually faster than his Kyogre meant that like I was going for very like Groudon centric game plans into it. I don't think I played it very well, to be honest with you, but it's like I could kind of see just like there was a way to just use Groudon to just totally shut out the Kyogre. And it's like with a light screen up and with the max quake up, you can kind of prevent the Kyogre from doing any damage, which I think is like pretty cool. And also it's like if you force out an early max, then you can like reconcile around like a Venusaur sweep. So it's like it's a tough matchup that like I had prepped a decent amount before the tournament. And all that prep, like I didn't play well, like as well as I should have. but like the prep got me to the point where it's like I was playing good enough to win. It's like kind of similar thing against Justin. Game one, I actually did choke a guaranteed win, but it's like played good enough to win, and he didn't like punish the choke. Yeah, versus Justin was interesting just because like it was like the type of thing where it's like you just think of like this elaborate like flowchart in order to just be like, all right, but I think that this kind of works, and just like trying to lock out all of the options. It's like realizing that okay, well the Palkia Life Orb Max Geyser doesn't one shot Charizard with Light Screen up, so you can leverage that, and it's just like. So I had like just in my head just prepped like all of like the lines for that approach. And then I immediately for game two threw it away because I just was like, Justin is going to figure out some way to just like say that that line doesn't work because he knows the team a lot better than I do. And so I just said, all right, I'm going to go Grim Lunala and just like have him miss a Hypno, like either game two or game three.
Yeah. And like I alluded to earlier, I played Choppa, who was running the same team in round 2 of Swiss. And I beat him because I clicked Hypnosis a bunch of times, and I hit most of my Hypnosis. I think I hit 4 of the 5 Hypnosis that I went for.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you, me, Choppa, Justin, and actually 4 of the top 8 in that top cut were all in the same Airbnb.
Yeah, John Who, you forgot.
With the group of us. Yeah, John Who, Justin, me, you. We're all in top cut and all staying in the same place. So we were like bantering before top cut because we were all like potentially going to play each other, and you of course, and you and Justin were playing each other, and you told him that you just have to hit your Hypnoses, and that's the matchup. And then he went for Hypnosis once the entire matchup.
I honestly thought by telling Justin, bro, no, you just need to go for Hypnosis, he would think that I was memeing and like would think that there was some secret tech to like figure it out, but there wasn't.
No, you just got to go for it.
I also played Donald Smith like earlier that tournament, who did try to Hypnosis me, but that game had a funny conclusion where I messed up and thought a double up into Palkia would KO, which he also thought because he went for a double Trick Room, like without Trick Room being up. So it's just like he banked on one of them going down and neither of them went down.
Yeah, in testing, he would go for double Trick Rooms a lot, and the rest of us never did. And we kept telling him, don't do that. It's almost never the right play. And then, of course, not only does he do it and lose to you and potentially miss top cut because of that, but then Justin does it in top 4 internets and also wasn't supposed to do it.
I know, yeah. So. No, it's like, y'all need that button grayed out, I swear to God.
Yeah. So that's if you ever use the Palkia Cali Ice team, don't go for double Trick Room. I guess that's the lesson from this. And so I guess those are, the notable that. Did you want to talk about the finals at all?
Yeah. So I had a bit of an advantage going into finals just because Chuppa had played Zach previously in Swiss. It was able to tell me a couple of his scary techs, namely the Grass Knot on Nihilego. But what that also meant with revealing Meteor Beam and Power Gem is that I knew for a fact that his Nihilego didn't have Sludge Bomb, which I think was something that I was able to leverage that none of his previous opponents were able to leverage, just having that perfect knowledge. And with that, it kind of turned Grimmsnarl into this unstoppable force, basically saying like Grimmsnarl only like can get knocked out if you try to Solgaleo it, but then you're gonna have to like bring the Solgaleo into the Charizard and the Lunala, which he was scared to do. So I think I did a good enough job of just like recognizing like what my good Pokemon were there and just like really, really leaning on it. One thing that I really do like with this team is that I think that you're able to change up your game plans in a best of 3 setting like very consistently. And so like you can make it so that your opponent doesn't really know like what they're doing. So like for the first 2 games, I brought Grim Venu because I thought it was the most stable lead. And then I was kind of going like, all right, if this is a game 3 thing and like you see the Grim Venu twice, you're going to assume that like that's probably it for the 3rd time, especially if there's no obvious way of beating it. So that's when I went like full out, just I'm going to lead Venudon. And I think I just won game 3 off the spot, just from like being able to make that lead adjustment, which the team's flexibility lets me do. Because I know, like, even if I run into like something bad, this team has an amazing ability to just always consolidate. And so it's like it doesn't matter which Pokemon are left alive. Like you can make a game plan in and out to win out of just like a few broken Pokemon and some twigs and some strike, which like I don't know. I think is really cool, and I think like allows the team to like lend itself to my strength as a player, which is like coming up with those like on the spot game plans.
Yeah. And so again, I definitely recommend that you try this team out. We have the paste in the description, both for the Vancouver variant and the Nationals variant, and a rental code on screen right now. Of course, this is not the exact team that you used at Vancouver. This is the team that you used for Nationals because you don't have the team on card anymore.
Yeah, no, I needed to. Yeah, I needed to change all the moves and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, but now again, thank you so much for coming on the channel. I really appreciate it, and congratulations again on your 3rd regional championship. Did you have any final words or shout outs that you wanted to give?
Yeah, I just want to give a big shout out to Elisa and Sheppa for just like sticking with me on the ride of this team and just like I don't know, trusting me with like the game plans and stuff and just helping me like make this into the best team it could be.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Thank you all for watching. And until next time, I will see you all later.